all of things, Ben. I'm not going to say those things now, but we're just so grateful, Ben, that you're here, that you have helped us, you are helping us, and you will help us. You will help us. So welcome.
Thank you. That was very nice. And I appreciate, as I said yesterday, Matt's warm welcome and invitation and this nice honor that I'm to get here. It means a lot to me, as some of you know. 35, 40 years ago, I began to move out from my world of computer science into being 20% of an experimental psychologist and to think about the way to study the people who use technology. And that's been a very satisfying trajectory of what's happened since then. Now, it wasn't always easy. When you're doing something new, your colleagues look at you and scratch their heads and they're not sure if this is the right thing. So I did manage to get my tenure and everything else based on the database work. But then I was free at night to do the other stuff. And that's flourished in a very good way. So I want to tell you a little bit about that. But before I do that, I realized I should fix this slide because you were talking about, there we go. Oh, hold on. I was charmed by this note, which on this screen is a little too small, but there's the motto of Swansea University. That's pretty cool, right? Technical skill is bereft without culture. Bit of a curious wording, but I think it sort of represents a good vision that many people are now coming back to restore the Leonardo-like connection between arts and science, between technology and design. And those issues were on my mind and were motivating me in my career. And that's a little bit about what I want to talk about. I'm always happy to wave the flag of the Human Computer Interaction Lab at the University of Maryland. Now celebrated its 35th anniversary on its 8th director. And so I hope you'll come visit us or visit our website where there are 1,000 technical reports and 200 videos and so on. And it's an interdisciplinary group that works between computer science and College of Information Studies as well as other units on campus, including the Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities, MITH. So that's a wonderful bunch. And I hope some of you know me from the book Designing User Interface, now in 6th edition. And it tells the story from its beginning of the evolution of this field. And we have a lot to be proud of, that 7 billion people in the world have something like this in their pockets, and they can use it to be in touch with family, to conduct business, to get health care, to get education. And that's a remarkable, satisfying part of the world that myself, Matt, and others have contributed to. And it's just a wonderful story to see. My own work, the things that are nice and easy stories are the idea of web links. Certain ones, this is the Wikipedia entry for the University of Maryland, and certain words are highlighted in blue. You click and go there. It was our work that did that in 1984 and 85. So it's kind of a sweet story to see how that happens. Tim Berners-Lee, who was a colleague, had seen the work. He cites that in his Manifesto for the Web of 1989. And that becomes part of the web by 91, 2, 3. So sometimes you see the clear path of how things go. Also, these little touchscreen keyboards, the one on your phone here, came from our work as well. At the time, touchscreens required large buttons, and so we made a keyboard that was 9 inches wide, and you could type on it. And then we made one 7 inches, and 5 inches, and 3 inches. 3 inches was tough. And so it works by having a cursor above your finger, and the activation is when you lift off. That was the technology, and that was our paper in 1988. I was a consultant for Apple. Steve Jobs visited our lab, and so we know the path by which those things happen. So, it's always fun when I see someone on the street who's doing that. I say, oh, great. And then things like tagging with photos were also our work. So that's kind of where I came from. But most of my work has been on information visualization with commercial tools like Spotfire, the tree maps. I'm so pleased Bob Laramie and team are very engrossed in making tree maps even better. And we also worked on network visualization. Where is my, here we are, there's my Node Excel hat. So, that was another nice success story of 600,000 users, downloads at least, and an active user community, and most recently about electronic medical records and a system called EventFlow. Now, what led us, I mean, not all our work was successful, not everything was, but we worked, and we worked hard, and we produced a lot of papers. And what seemed to be an important factor in a success story was that it was working on a real problem with real users and real data. Real problems, real users, real data. And that became an important theme that I became more and more aware of over the years. We were supported by companies, and sometimes we worked close enough that the people in the companies were co-authors to our papers. And I was unaware about whether that was a good or bad thing. It just seemed the thing to do. But today's talk is to try to give you evidence that I hope will change your mind for you to adopt new ways of doing the research you do. And maybe Matt and other administrators in the university can find ways to propagate this idea, because I think it will help advance the belief in Swansea, the goals you set, and this technology and culture linkage. It will make for greater success stories. That's my belief. That's what I have to convince you about. So, 2 years ago when I was here, I spoke about the new ABCs of research. That was a book I wrote to try to tell the story of my discovery of these methods and the emergence of the word design. At the time, I showed a graph that demonstrated that design has become the dominant term, more frequently used in the Google's Ngram viewer of all English language books than science or engineering. Design is ascendant. After 1975, design came from the bottom to become the most dominant term. So I would say one thing, I hope Swansea will adopt more design thinking, design courses, and it can be separate departments or separate courses, or it can be integrated into other coursework. But getting students to have the experience of creating something, and I saw today with Bob Laramie and students, well-crafted designs, smooth animations, proper color choices, good controls. And those are the kind of things you learn by doing them, not by watching them, but by doing them. And you have to create them and create them for yourself, try them with users, and then recreate them again and again, the iterative process. Okay, so that was the theme then. And the book was called The New ABCs of Research, and that was a little bit of a joke. If you can read the subtitle, the ABC was Achieving Breakthrough Collaborations. And that was an important message because others had identified clearly that teamwork was a huge advantage in improving the quality of work and its impact. Okay? And that advantage has grown over years. 50 years ago, when the first studies were done of citations, the groups that went from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 co-authors had a consistently higher citation count by about a factor of 1.7. Okay? So even 50 years ago was an advantage. Now 50 years ago, only, well let's say 50 years ago, 50% of the papers were written by one author. Okay, imagine. I mean, today, it's inconceivable. Now, 90% of the papers are written by teams. 90% of papers are written by teams. The difference is vast in what's happened. In 1965, the most number of co-authors of an astronomy paper was 6. And now we have astronomy papers with 1,000 authors. We have biology papers or physics papers. So the shift to teamwork is enormous. Now, the advantage, of course, are more skills and many other things, but also the internet has made it possible to support these large-scale collaborations. And people have gotten better. So now the advantage of going from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 co-authors is twice as much, 3.4 times. And I'm going to show you the data, including data about Swansea, about teamwork. So the first message, the first ABC, is achieving breakthrough collaboration. Forming teams of diverse people is the first part of it, and the second part is managing the team and making it work. This is not easy. Most team projects fail. Most collaborations don't work out, and they break apart and people do differently. But when they succeed exceptionally well. So, this is a kind of education. Many of you may already be working in teams, but you may find that there are new kinds of teams and new ways of working together and new skills that you need that will improve your capacity to do teamwork. Okay? So there's a lot. The longest chapter is about teamwork, and you might take a look at it. Also, the National Academy of Sciences in the United States published 2 years ago a book called Enhancing the Effectiveness of Team Science. A wonderfully written free book to download that's well written with good advice and good solid literature behind it. But there's a growing awareness of the power of teamwork. So that's ABC, Achieving Breakthrough Collaboration. There were a few other fun ones in there as well. Always build connections, the networking, get out there, give talks at other places, invite other people, visit other departments. Always build connections. A little bit of a joke was ask better questions. Was another thing. And then the one that was really on my mind was applied and basic compliance. And that's how the title came to be, applied and basic. That the old way of thinking, the way I was taught, was that you do basic research in the laboratory, and then you do applied research, you find the application, then you seek to make markets and go to make products to go to markets, and then you develop a product. This idea is very strongly in the minds of most researchers who want to stay in their laboratory and do basic research because that's the highest level of aspiration, or so they believe. And the evidence over the last years, including my own, others have come to say that is wrong. That is wrong, that is wrong. And while others have written that somehow basic research, we don't know what, but in the future it will lead to some wonderful, important ideas. It may be true, and you have examples where that happens. But you're more likely to find big breakthroughs if you work on a real problem. Now, the best example is Louis Pasteur, who worked on the problems of milk spoilage and of wine going bad. And he worked with the farmers, and he worked with the winemakers, and what did he get? He gets the germ theory of disease. Okay? A big breakthrough of a basic problem. And again, even if you look at the Nobel Prize winners in physics and chemistry and other areas, you will find that often they were driven by a real problem which led to a basic research result. I'm not going to go into the whole story, but there's an important message there. It's not to do one or the other, but to do them together. So that's a further reason why you need a team. You need a team of people who know about a problem in depth, who care about the problem, and you need a set of people who are researchers who understand how to do research and have certain methods like computing or chemistry or biology or other methods. And if you put them together, no guarantees, but you have a greater chance of success. And that's what I hope to convince you. This is a short talk to promote discussion. And mainly I want to show you the data that I found in the last 2 years and actually in the last 2 weeks. Okay? Now, in writing about it, I've changed my language, and lately I'm using the phrase the twin-win. People seem to like that idea, and that's what I'm advocating, that you shape your thinking. That you want to do two things. You want breakthrough theories and published papers and validated solutions ready for dissemination. That, I think, is the appropriate aspiration for research groups. To take research to a market and to make a commercial project is 10 times more effort and a different kind of effort. But the goal of research should be to explore new ideas, publish them as widely generalizable theories in the usual places, and also have a solution, whether it's open source software or a patent or other ways in which it can be put to work. And so your goal should be to try to do it. You don't always succeed. Sometimes you get it, but I would say looking and shaping your work to go that way is a better chance of success. Let me take a breath and see if you have any questions or challenges for that idea. If you say you're doing that already,
I
thank
have
you, Bob.
this is kind of a comment. I'm not sure if it's a question, but I noticed that somebody who still has sort of the, let's say, the older traditional way of thinking where everything starts with basic research, they often use, I believe, the term blue sky.
Yes.
Like, oh, but we need blue sky,
Yes.
research. What do you,
Yes.
like?
In fact, when the Times Higher Education did a story about the book, they wanted to call it something like Attacking the Blue Sky. And I said, no, it's not attack. I said it's beyond blue sky. Okay?
Okay.
So I would say when you work on a real problem, you're at a higher level. Your skies are bluer, the possibilities are broader. Having the constraints and challenges to work on a real problem, we'll come to see at the end, having the clarity when you work with a partner that wants to get something done, that has a schedule, that has a budget, it clarifies your thinking. So I'm not opposed to blue sky, but I'm saying I believe you'll get to bigger ideas like Louis Pasteur by working on those real problems. And this is a common, you're voicing a very common belief, and I held that belief too. But I'm seeing more and more clearly about the power of these old methods. Anybody else? Something you want to say, or yes?
So how have things moved on from Pasteur's time? So Pasteur, he achieved, breakthrough results, but we associate those results with him rather than the network of people he worked with. So in your sort of model of these collaborations, we avoid sort of having the individual genius.
Well, the journalistic versions of history tend to focus on the individual. And I would say even in my own work, I'm always careful to thank my students and celebrate their role, but I'm getting this award on Friday, so, there's a certain tendency to go that way. But teamwork has become, I think, the dominant form of powerful research. So whether you're looking in biology or particle physics or gravity waves, teams are, I think, the strong element. And it's nice to tell a story about an individual, but I do think teamwork is still the dominant form. I'm not sure if I've answered your question.
Oh yeah, no.
All right.
Well, I
would say, I think we've gone well beyond Louis Pasteur, and I could go. There's many examples to take that are contemporary ones, but I would say, for the moment, just say that the capacity for teams to, and I would say the leader of a team deserves some recognition as well, but working in those ways is having these two goals in mind. And I might say, so this happens when you have a partnership with business or government or NGOs off campus, but I heard nice examples in Bob's group where if someone on campus, such as the literary department, had a problem to analyze 38 German translations of Othello, and Bob and Mohammed, is Mohammed here? No, but, had, what?
I think he's gone to praise.
Okay, so that, they were working, their partner was the John Cheeseman.
Tom Cheeseman, yeah.
The literary professor. So those kind of things work there as well. Okay, so I began to formulate this as the TwinWin. It's a phrase people like, but of course people want to know where's the evidence, okay? Now, evidence is quite difficult to get, so we start with a story. And this is my favorite story of a dear colleague, Rita Colwell. I hope you know her, or will come to know her. Here's another case where she's the hero. She's wearing the pin of the U.S. Medal of Science given to her by Obama in 2009. Now she's deserving for many reasons. She was the head of the National Science Foundation for 6 years. She was the leader of many organizations. But the story I like to tell about Rita Colwell is this teamwork that she did in Bangladesh. There are 10 co-authors, local people, public health people in Bangladesh. And she knew that every year the monsoon rains come and the floods put sewage into the water and the cholera epidemics begin. And she used all modern technology, satellite imagery and big data analyses and so on to understand. And she had one bit of science that she knew, because she's a microbiologist. So how do you catch cholera? Contaminated water. What's in the water? The cholera bacteria. Correct. If you drink the cholera bacteria, you have a chance to get sick. But she knew one other thing. That the cholera bacteria, they may be in the water, but they concentrate on the surface of these little characters called copepods, 1 millimeter or 2 millimeters. There are about 10,000 cholera bacteria on the surface. And while when there's a flood, it's very hard to purify the water, either by filtration or by boiling or anything else, she thought maybe if you could pour the water through a filter, a simple filter, maybe you could catch the copepods. And so her idea, it's just a simple, charming idea. Any one of us could have come up with it. What's available to these women who collect the water? They're saris, cotton saris. And so she instructed them to make 8 layers of the cloth and then to pour the water through the cloth. And then you could see the copepods collecting on the outside. And the water inside was noticeably clearer. Yes, there was still cholera bacteria, but not so much. And so she had a bit of science, a basic theory, and then she began the design of a public health story. She worked with her colleagues in Bangladesh in 19 villages. She worked with the hospitals to collect the data of the number of cholera patients and the number of deaths. And for 3 months, they ran the study, and they found that those who used the filter had no significant difference. So the first time was not a success. They learned a lot, because some of these women believed that they did this once, it was enough, and they had to be trained to do it every time. Okay? They got better at collecting the data in the hospitals. They got better at training. They went back now to 65 villages and 133,000 people. It's quite an experiment. And there's the results. Finally, they came back. The control group, that's the group who were using the sari, they had half the number of cholera deaths. It's a dramatic result. She's received worldwide recognition for this. It's changed public health in many, many places. She received the Légion d'honneur de France, the Humboldt Prize from Germany, the Japan Prize, everywhere in the world. People have come to see this, particularly this study, and there are many papers after it that catalog this public health approach. So for me, it's a great example because she has scientific basis, she had an insight about how to do it, and she tried it at scale in the real world, not in a laboratory study in a university, but at scale. So that's the case study. But I'm going to shift towards the data, for those who like data and big science. This is the story about the Scopus Papers, or the Web of Science. There are 70 million papers published in these, and they're recorded in these databases. And it may be troubling for you to learn, but 44% of published papers receive 0 citations. These are all peer-reviewed papers. 32% get 1 to 9 citations. Hope you can see it, but then a smaller amount get a lot more, and then at the very top there are a few. There are 3 papers that have received 100,000 citations. It's amazing. They are methods for doing research, they're chemical processes and so on. So some of the famous papers like Watson and Crick, they quickly become part of the culture and then people don't cite them. But these papers are cited more than 100,000 times. They're quite an achievement for anyone who follows these kind of things. So I began to ask the question, could I find a way to collect evidence that papers that worked according to the methods I was describing had higher citations? Now I know citation counts are imperfect for a lot of reasons, but yet they seem to be one way of assessing impact. And so I started with the University of Maryland. if you're a single author at the University of Maryland and you publish a paper, on average, you get 3.0 citations. If you work with colleagues at the University of Maryland, you get 6.1. If you work with others in the United States, 9.2. If you work internationally, 13.9. But if you work with a corporate or a government partner, 20.3. Now that was pretty surprising to me. It was quite interesting. It's a strong effect, and I wondered how reliable it was. And I did do several things to dig deeper. First, I looked at different departments in the university, and there's a great variation across fields. And it's not a simple pattern. But I began to look at other universities, and so, well, you're not going to be able to see this at all. All right, so I took the top 6 private universities in the U.S., topped by the number of papers produced: Harvard, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, and MIT. And you have the same pattern everywhere. The same pattern, sometimes stronger, sometimes less strong, but the pattern was consistent. And then I did the 6 major state universities: Michigan, Washington, UCLA, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and San Diego. Again, the same pattern. That's pretty strong, and these are about to be published in a paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Now, I also did for UK universities. So you have Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial, UCL, Edinburgh, and Manchester. And again, you get the same pattern. I did also for 6 Canadian, I'm not sure, are they here? Yeah, 6 top Canadian universities, and you get more or less the same pattern. So the strength of this pattern and its consistency are quite powerful. Now there's many reasons to question it and challenge it, and we'll come back to that maybe. But you should take this in, that there's something strong about what happens when there's a collaboration that includes a co-author. That's the signal I could measure. A co-author from outside the campus. So it doesn't include the cases we talked about of having somebody on campus that you're working for. And often I saw that in our own work, we worked with partners off campus, but sometimes they were not co-authors. But I think when they become a co-author, they become more devoted to the work, they become more engaged, they spend more time, they care about making it succeed. So here's Swansea, a very, still further unusual pattern. So single author are actually quite low, but, oh, that shouldn't be. Oh, let's fix that right away. Only Swansea. You can see how I made my slides. All right. Whoops. Okay. So, only Swansea co-authors, it does jump up. National in the UK, international helps, but was way off the screen for it. And I don't know, so I'm asking you, I just got this on the train when I was coming here on Monday. I have a very good partner at Elsevier who was doing these kinds of data searches for me, and he provided this, and it's a startling result. Now, I don't know if there are some colleges who have a strong pattern of working with some on off campus. Is there anyone have a clue as to why it's 40.9? That's higher than any other university, more than Harvard.
Engineering.
Engineering has a lot. Yeah? Yeah, they have a history of working together. And of publishing, including them as co-authors. Because, by the way, notice, when you go back to MIT, which is strong over here, MIT does a lot of work with industry, but they don't usually include them as co-authors. So there's something interesting going on here that maybe we can figure out what's going on, or you could track, or maybe you do a little more research about the people at Swansea who collaborate off campus, and you might ask them what their pattern of work is. And that's that's the other direction of work. Besides these number data, you know, the question we really have is, if now our goal is not retrospectively to analyze, but prospectively to change the way things happen, how do we raise research impact? I don't think just adding the name of a co-author from off campus helps. I think having a co-author who's involved from the beginning is the important message. So, there's a few simple things. Forming teams by working with problem owners is what I'm saying. That not just to get the problem or interview them, but to keep them as close enough to make them part of the team. And diverse team membership, men and women, young and old, different skills are another important part of it. That teamwork is a very strong contributor. The multiple authors have a few effects. First of all, it gives these different perspectives. It gets people to challenge each other. And you may smile, but there's an advantage when you have multiple authors because they will promote the work and cite it, and there's many more voices to speak about the work. So it's a kind of, public relations aspect. But these data are strong, and even if you remove self-citations, which are about 10 or 15% of all papers, you still get the same effect. Okay? So your skepticism is appropriate, but take this in. There's something going on here. Seek collaboration-ready team members. Some people don't like to work on teams. And you're better off, there's a kind of nice study that shows that people who have worked in teams in the past are more likely to succeed by working in the future. But there may be ways where administrators can offer training and encouragement for collaborations. And there may be such simple things as teaching people to learn shared documents and Google Docs and Skype and Zoom and other tools, Slack, or other forms of collaboration, or maybe technologies. But the idea of having different perspectives on a problem, I think, is the strongest contributor. And then there are ways of managing teams. And then there's a set of things that you can do fundamentally as a university, building long-term relationships with professionals in business and government labs, inviting them to speak on campus, going there, sending your students to work there. I've heard already about such projects going on, so I know that happens, but it could happen more regularly. So that's an important step. Seek funding to work on problems that business and government find relevant. So the problems may be, the choice of problems may be important. Rather than the problems brought forward by a researcher, the problems brought forward by a practitioner may actually be better. And that's what I'm coming to show you in a moment. Encourage your students to do internships. Okay, I guess I should go back. I don't. So the other way I tried to continue my research about this was not just the numerical ones, but I searched at the University of Maryland for which professors had the most papers in the past 5 years that had a co-author from business. And one of my colleagues in computer science had 22 such papers co-authored with business in the last 5 years. And I went to him. His name is Muhammad also. So I went to Muhammad and I said, I know him well because I was a reviewer for his promotion. And he's a theory guy. He's an algorithms guy. And I was totally surprised. And I went to Muhammad and I said, look at this. You have the most of anyone in this university of papers collaborating with business. And he said, of course, people in business have better problems. People in business have better problems. It was really a perfect phrase. And he said, I send my students there, I invite them to speak. My students graduate, they go to work there, I invite my students back, I continue the collaboration, because he likes the problems he gets from people in business. Now, it doesn't have to be business, it could be government agencies, it could be social organizations, other kind of groups. But having people with a real problem they care about is important. And real problems are defined by having a schedule, having resources, having a budget, and it forces decisions to be made. And it forces you to choose sooner than later which paths to go. So, while Bob raised a reasonable point that says, isn't it good to have blue sky thinking and open-ended? Maybe, and I don't want to reject it, but I believe the evidence and what I've understood, you're more likely to get an interesting result if you work on a real problem. Okay, so that's where it's gone, that's the book. I did produce a small little book on self-published on Kindle that has 34 methods for changing universities, so that's another follow-up. But the most important thing I want to tell you about is the efforts of several groups in the US, Australia, and so on to move towards this way. Even in UK also, the UK innovation efforts, EPSRC has some efforts in this direction, National Science Foundation in the US also. So there's a general movement, it's meeting some resistance, but there is a movement. So this group called HiBAR, Highly Integrative Basic and Responsive Research. It's a name made by a committee, but it's okay. And their language is to say, the goal is deep new knowledge and validated practical solutions that combines academic research methods and practical design thinking, engages the efforts of respected academics and real-world experts. So this group has met 6 times now in the last 2 years, and we now have support from other groups. In the US, there's a wonderful organization called APLU, Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities, that are the major state universities, and also the National Academy of Sciences. I've done 3 workshops for the National Academy of Sciences, and they have a group there called the Government University Industry Research Round Trip Table. And that group has been working for many years to build collaborations between universities and industries. And they've also spun off a wonderful organization that's now separate, it's already 10 years, called, and you can take a look, UIDP, University Industry Demonstration Partnerships, uidp.org. And they have all the case studies of how companies are working with universities. Their members are the companies and the universities. And I've spoken at their meeting. It's a wonderful group that really has its mind and its heart in a good way. So, if you want to join in the fun here, the HiBAR Research Alliance is working to do these things. We have a website, you probably can't see it, but aplu.org/HiBAR will get you there with our information, and you can contact us there. And that's the story. That I hope you'll find ways to make a unique Swansea version of this. Each university has to find its own path. But these days, the discussion of engagement is a big word at many universities. Maybe I should say the word interdisciplinary is also popular, or transdisciplinary, but to me that's not enough. The real sweet spot, the real opportunity is to work on a real problem, real users, and real data, so as to produce a solution and a breakthrough theory. The TwinWin. That's my offer to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben, and I'm sure many of us have all sorts of questions and suggestions and comments. Who would like to start? Yes, in the back. I can see one bubbling up. I was pointing at you as you turned round. Yeah. Never turn round.
Good, so I was wondering, since you asked me to ask, I'll ask. Look, I agree with many things you said. But on the other hand, let me give another. So you show papers and their impact, right? And maybe one should wonder if the number of citations is the true quality of the paper, right? We agree, and as you mentioned, the more authors you work with, the more possibility that in their next papers they will cite this one, and we agree, right? So it's a social construct. Maybe a bit of an unfair thing to do to the diagrams you have shown is to ask which of those papers were worthy of Nobel Prizes or big prizes. And probably the corporate will not fit there, whilst the more individual ones will. I don't know. I didn't do the statistics, obviously, right? So I can think maybe cherry-picking examples.
All right, there's many challenges. Your one, if I can repeat, is that it may be that these are average results, but the big papers come from a different kind of work. And I can't say no, but I'll tell you a story. So, for example, Arno Penzias and Robert Wilson received the Nobel Prize for cosmic background radiation. Okay, the Big Bang. They received a Nobel Prize for this. How did they get there?
They were working in Bell Labs.
They were working in Bell Labs to improve microwave communications.
Yes.
All right? They were working on a real problem, and therefore they get a Nobel Prize because they found something big. All right?
Do you agree that that is cherry picking? Because in the same way, one could pick a different problem
Yeah.
that were not working on a real problem, and then with the passing of time.
Sure. There are problems where people worked on some abstract idea and it came to be. Sure, there will be. But I would say my advice, if you are a young researcher, you are more likely to have a big success if you take the path of the TwinWin than if you take the path. You know, the famous book on this topic from 1945 is Vannevar Bush was the science advisor to Franklin Roosevelt. It's an interesting book called The Science, the Endless Frontier. And he was the advocate for blue sky, unfettered research. And he said, inevitably, these will lead to big, important projects. It's not true. It's not true. It's not true. Okay? There are some. But the more likely path, now it's not, I showed you data that I found, but you can look at our other sources. A very strong group at Northwestern University, Brian Uzi and Benjamin Jones, who studied these kind of patterns, found quite similar results. So a recent one showed that the papers, I have to get this right, that had high impact also had a large number of patents that cited that work. A high citation counts of papers. So there is a correlation. Another study, in the recent one, the Department of Energy in the United States funds research, and they have a long history of funding basic research. But about, maybe it's 10 years already, they started a group called ARPA-E, Advanced Research Project Agency for Energy. So ARPA, or DARPA, is a group within the Defense Department that's quite famous for having produced a lot of breakthroughs. And they wanted to do the same thing in the energy sector. And this paper studies the 5-year history of ARPA grants. And ARPA grants produced far more impact and patents than the basic research that was funded by other parts of the Department of Energy. So I can never give you a conclusive result, but I'm happy to have the challenges because maybe you'll find a better way to understand, to explain this data. There's something here, I can't ignore this kind of data. I can't ignore it, and I have to find some way to explain it. And we can look at the ways to challenge it, but I think we should also look at the ways to say there's a lesson here. So I like the discussion, I like the challenges, but I hope at the same time you take this in and think that maybe there's something going on here about a way that universities should be changing their research. Yeah, okay, one here and then in the back, yeah.
Very concerned about this.
Yes, okay.
Because if I look at real big breakthroughs, many of them had 0 applications.
Had 0 applications?
So if you look at limits of computation, and I know of lots of people who are working on, let's say, proof theory. There was one paper I studied for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I fully understand it yet. But there is this area where you you need these people who, with all their power, all their dedication, go into something where they, and many of course fail. But if we don't address these really theoretical problems, humanity will lose something. Because we go too much into, I think there's too much in this world, there's too much doing actually. We have huge problems on this planet. We don't know how to cope with climate change, etc. And underlying is really, there is something, the problems are not in the doing, the problems are on a much deeper phase.
Maybe.
It doesn't mean that, so in my research always, for me it was always important to know a route towards applications. But for me a route to applications can mean 100 years.
So there's a few parts to what you're saying. I mean, one is, well, the last point was the long time period it takes. If you try to look for applications too soon, you may cut off the longer term, bigger results, is what you're saying. Is that right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it's entirely possible. I would say, though, from what I see in the examples I look at, it's quite rare to find that. There are some examples, but often there was something that was practical along the way. So one of the examples I describe in the book is the LIGO, the Laser Interferometry, the Gravitational Wave Observatory. You know, the gravitational wave detector that's in the, found evidence of gravitational waves, a 100-year-old problem. And they were working for 40 years to find this. But along the way, they developed very practical methods for measuring very, very small changes. So the wave they had to detect was smaller than the size of a proton, okay? And so there were practical methods along the way. And I think you can embed these longer-term, large ideas into systems that have somewhat more practical. There are many other projects. Going to Mars. What's the advantage of going to Mars? Is it a scientific project? Is it a technology project? Is it a national? There are many reasons we choose different projects. I guess maybe the way I should come back to you, if you were giving advice to the EPSRC, what percentage of the money would you give to blue sky, long-term, unlimited, and what percent would you give to projects that had a more practical, short-term lead? I think that's the question we have to ask ourselves. And then when we're teaching our students, how much should we teach them to just sit in their room and work on their own, and how much should we teach them to work with others, to try to make changes, and to have projects? I'm a great believer in team projects with students who work with someone outside the university to promote a project which survives beyond the semester. I've found that to be very practical. So these are the choices that are hard for administrators, and I do think, though, to shift the balance towards these kind of project-oriented research that works on real problems is important. I saw in the back, and then we'll get to, yeah.
So I very much appreciate what you've been saying, and I agree in large part. I'm working on the evolution of engineering education. Going from a social science background, looking at the evolution of engineering education, where we need to go, and it's in line with what you're talking about. The next problem horizon that I see in a lot of cases that I've looked at is, one, that there's a tendency to jump to solution space before the right problem has been identified.
Yep.
So maybe can you talk about what you've learned about how to manage those different partnerships that you're encouraging, that you're talking about? what have you learned along the way
Yeah.
about managing those very different types?
Those of you who need to go, that's fine. Please, thank you for coming.
About managing those very different
Yeah.
types of stakeholders that
Yeah.
really are looking for different things,
Yeah.
different outcomes, with regard to then the proper problem formation, and then down the line, recognizing, or it's actually really many steps behind that, upstream, is recognizing that there's a lot of power dynamics that go into the problem definition as well. And you talk about the importance of diverse teams in solving these problems. So I guess it's how do we form the right teams for even identifying what the right problem is? And then once we're in those teams, how can we ensure that we're continuing to move towards the right?
Great. I'll come back and do that talk. About teamwork and managing teamwork is a whole subject in itself. And I just repeat, majority of team projects fail. They don't fail disastrously, but they fail, they don't go on, people go in different ways. There's a lot of ways teams fall apart. We also, in our research, we often get companies who come to us who have some sort of practical short-term goal of something they want to do. And our question is, your project's interesting, but what's the paper? Okay? If there's no paper for my students or myself, there's no project for me. Okay, so that's one way that I find it. Now, to work with them, they may want to work and support us for 1 month to do something. I say no. You have to support us for 1 year. You have to support my students for 1 year so we can learn about you. And within the context of a year project, if there's something more practical for a month, then we can do that with you. But I agree with you. Choosing the right problem is important, and yet the literature is almost empty about how research teams choose problems. Peter Medawar, famed British biologist, Peter Medawar, Nobel Prize winner, wrote about choosing problems, he says, don't choose piffling problems. You may know this phrase, but he tried to be kind of funny, but there was no advice about what to choose. He said, don't choose little problems. So, chapter 6 of my book is all about choosing problems. How to choose a problem that's in contemporary interest for society. There are the list of grand challenges of the National Academy of Engineering. There's the United Nations Millennium Development, Sustainable Development Goals. There's the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grand challenges. Those are big challenges, okay? Making clean water in the world is a nice big goal, but each one of us as a researcher or as a team can only do something small. Maybe it's to measure the quality of the water. Maybe it's to remove one kind of pollutant. Maybe it's to include something else that contributes to water quality. Each one of us can only make one tile of the larger mosaic. So, but being aware of the larger mosaic, of fitting your thinking into a large societal benefit, after all, I should have made stronger. The point about all this is to produce benefits for society. That's why we're doing this. That's what we mean by improving research impact and improving quality and having better research. We want to make the world a better place, right? And we can't do the big thing, but each one of us can do one tile of the mosaic. So getting agreement early on, we always, when we start a project, we have a plan of what we're going to do, and we start by giving the title of the paper we're going to write when we're done, and who the co-authors will be in what order. Who's the first author? Who's the second author? At the beginning. We can change it, of course, but by clarifying responsibility, I find the project is more likely to move forward. And sometimes we have projects where we have those two goals. We will publish a paper in information visualization and in economics or biology or or English literature. And so you can look for these different goals, but from the beginning, if teams form around a set of goals, and individuals take responsibility to lead the papers they will produce. That's important. And I have a quite high expectation about paper production. I'm a great believer in producing lots of papers, okay? And I expect my students to be part of one paper in the spring, one in the fall, and one in the summer. An expectation there should be 3 papers a year that they're part of. And the production of papers, it helps advance their thinking in research. I reject the criticism of the overproduction of papers. I think it's great that teams are producing lots of papers. The conferences and journals I submit to have very low acceptance rates, 20%, 15%, or even less. And so I don't think the papers that get published are low quality. I think there's a lot of good work, and I'm a great believer in publishing, because publishing forces you to put your idea out, clarify your goals, and then you learn, you get the feedback early on. I was taught that you do your research, and then 5 years later you publish your results, or 3 years later, whatever. No. If you can't have a result within 6 months that you can submit for publication, then your plan is not good enough. So I'm trying to find the ways to force it. Maybe I should give you a chance to respond to those.
I was looking for like concrete advice, because we could talk around this issue a lot, but concrete advice I think is where what we need. Like you said, there's not a lot of advice about how to actually define that problem and define it well. I think the piece that is missing is about the power dynamics that are inherently involved in developing that problem. Maybe that's outside of the scope of what you're discussing today, but that's something that considering.
Yeah, I mean, senior leaders may dominate, there may be powerful forces. Yeah, those are all complicated, well-discussed issues. Yeah, there's no simple way around. There are advice, I mean, actually working with a well-established, famous professor at a leading university is a good idea. All right? And, women have a harder time in getting papers accepted and in getting their work approved and getting cited. Women are also less likely to cite their own work. All right? So there's a lot of dynamics around gender issues, and also issues about different cultures and different attitudes. And so all those things are being studied, and I tried to give a pretty detailed description of them in the book. There's a lot of issues about teamwork. And let's take one more question.
Right, you already have half addressed my request. Concerns, what should I say, the question of keeping business partners interested.
Yeah.
Because loads of the things that we have done over the last years we had companies running away, and it appears that the interest span of a company, when a problem needs a solution, and this timing is not really easily coordinated with the academic research, which sometimes needs longer time. And so that the business partners run away when you say, I'm well on my way, and you have the results already somewhere else. So maybe you can comment a little bit on...
Sure. I mean, we've run into businesses who have asked us to do things that we thought were unreasonable and not interesting, didn't give my students a chance to have something published. Also, companies who say, we want to restrict your right to publish, and we own all the intellectual results. My university does not allow that. So, but there are times we've left money on the table because we didn't agree to the terms. We do give companies the right to review our papers 2 weeks before they're submitted. Okay? Give us feedback, but they do not have the right to stop us. We have the final decision. So we seek their input, and what we tell them is, what we want is to please you so you'll renew our funding the next year. Okay? So I think that's kind of the bargain. Some companies do not accept that way of thinking, and they see universities as a resource. They just want to use your use you or use your reputation. So there are problems, but there are also opportunities. So I think that's the right way, and you have to learn how to do it. I mean, I've described a little. Also, I would say this organization I mentioned, UIDP.org, has a very good set of principles and case studies about success. And I just, return to the evidence is growing. I didn't want to go too far with it, but in the U.S., there are 14 advanced manufacturing research centers set up by Science Foundation. And those are collaborations of industry with government and with universities. And they have a huge success result in many, many ways of measuring that. So people are coming to see these stories. The ARPA-E story I told you is recent evidence published. There's an interesting journal called Research Policy, which publishes these studies quite regularly, and I've become quite the reader of those. It's quite far outside my own territory, but I've become quite interested in the ways of doing things. So, again, this is challenging and new area. I hope I provoked your thinking. I hope you'll give these ideas a chance, and I hope you'll change your ways of working when necessary to favor these approaches. Try them out. Try them not just once, because the first time may not be successful. Try them at least twice, and see if you can find your way to work in teams with partners outside the campus who have a real problem. That's the twin win.
Swansea University managers were like me, like to say around here that something's in our DNA. So I could say that everything we've been saying there is in our DNA, but I don't like that phrase, because DNA is very important, of course, but hidden. So I will say, and give commitment, is the kind of drive that you've been challenging us all with today has been with us since the foundation of this university, and will continue to be in our words, because we're Welsh, I guess, our song, and more importantly, our actions as we think about the next 100 years of this university. And I just really want to thank you again for giving us inspiration and challenge, and for all of us things to really drive us forward, because we're here not as an academic exercise. We're here, I know, looking around the room, because like you, we want to make a real difference. So thank you all. Thank you. Tomorrow, I think in the Taliesin room, the glass room, Jenny Priest, also from the same institution as Ben, will be giving us a talk at Simon what time?
Noon. Talk at 12:30, lunch at noon.
Lunch at noon. And those of you who are coming to graduation on Friday will see Ben in a different outfit, and we will continue our television. Thank you all.